Please welcome Dr. David Edelberg. I don't know if you want to say something first or...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll take questions in a little bit, but I just want to point out that movie is now 10 years old, and in 10 years, of course, we've had Obamacare that they're now trying to overturn. And throughout the film, the main issue, of course, was money and how people have difficulty paying for health care. That hasn't changed at all. And unfortunately, Obamacare, where the President, the Affordable Care Act, where the President had to make so many compromises in order to get the bill passed, it certainly hasn't made things worse, but it hasn't improved things the way that people had hoped they would. If anybody's been dealing with the Affordable Care Act or gone to healthcare.gov, they find that their deductibles are immensely high, their monthly premiums are huge, their copays are huge, and they say, well, what really happened here? And these are all the compromises that he had to make. Now, he mentioned a couple of things in the movie that are key. One of them is the comparison of health care to something like your fire department or your police department or your library, where you don't really think that you have to have insurance in order to get the fire department to come when your house is on fire. You're not going to call them and they're going to say to you, well, which fire department do you actually have? Do you have Aetna or do you have Cigna? And they said, I don't know, I have to check my card because my house is on fire. I think my card is burning. And they said, well, we'll check you in the computer. Oh, I'm sorry, you are covered by Blue Cross Fire Department, and you'll have to call them and then go through a phone tree, and then your house is gone. It doesn't work that way, obviously. On the other hand, firemen, to become a fireman, you don't have to pay $1,000 a week for 4 years in order to become a fireman. That's the current medical school education cost. It's $50,000 a year in order to go to medical school. And you heard in there that it's free in France. Because medical school is that expensive, the doctors leave with this crushing debt, and then they choose specialties not because of what they happen to like a lot, but what can get their debt paid off. So we have an excess of cosmetic surgeons and a shortage of primary care doctors, and really a major shortage of primary care doctors in small towns throughout America, which are mainly handled by immigrants who now can't get in because of Trump's issues. So the system is going crazier and crazier. Are things better or worse 10 years later? I've been a doctor for over 40 years, and I'm following healthcare economics constantly to see what's happening. Things are generally worse now than they were. The only positive that the movie showed, which was driving everyone crazy, doctors and patients alike, was the concept of denying for pre-existing conditions. I don't know if anybody has ever been denied, but when she said in there that she had been denied for a yeast infection, I have had patients actually tell me that they have been denied for vaginitis. I can't get insurance because I have vaginitis. Shows you the insanity of a system that would allow that. Now, what's currently going on now in healthcare as opposed to this with the pre-existing condition? In here, in the movie, the camera kept going back to the insurance companies and saying they're denying this, they're denying that, they're not covering this and not covering that. The tables have been turned over the past 10 years. The insurance companies, because of the Affordable Care Act, are now losing money. They were the ones who really were trying to block the Affordable Care Act because they thought if they couldn't get if they couldn't get the pre-existing condition going through, this is a medical term, the shit would hit the fan, which is exactly what happened. They suddenly were forced to take on people with chronic illnesses. It became inordinately expensive for them to handle this. And the insurance companies are either pulling out of the network, pulling out of different state pools, or they're just losing a fortune. Blue Cross of Illinois can't leave Illinois. When your name is Blue Cross of Illinois, you're kind of stuck here. And they actually have not been doing well lately. Now, not been doing well does not mean there's a tag day for Blue Cross. Don't get me wrong. But it's not making the fistful of dollars. When I used to go to Blue Cross for different meetings, which are indescribable, I jokingly say, I've never seen a building made of platinum. And they said, oh, it's really not platinum, it just looks that way. And I said, the building was built by healthcare denials. And they joked and said, well, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, in the long run, it really was done by denying healthcare. We get this beautiful building. So how have the tables turned? Well, these are really painful numbers to give you, and I just don't want you to be too nauseated by this. But we now spend on healthcare $10,400 per person in the United States, okay? What are we spending it on? Where's all this money going? Well, it's 18% of our gross national product is now spent. Something like, I think I last read $5 trillion is spent on healthcare. And with this immense amount of money going on, and the insurance companies pouring it in to the system, okay? I need you to get an image of healthcare today, and I'll elaborate on this. You're in a farm in the Midwest, okay? And in the farmyard, there's a trough. And the trough is for the pigs, the hogs. And the farmer comes by and he throws all the slop into the trough. And then all the hogs run over and they try to eat all the slop they can as fast as they can. With that in mind, that's healthcare these days. You've got an immense amount of money being poured into this trough, and you have all of these industries trying to get as much money as they can as fast as they can. Let's just take one industry at a time. I think, and I'm certainly not alone in this, a wonderful investigative reporter, Stephen Brill, has written about this, that the real villains today are the huge healthcare systems, the Northwesterns, the Presence Healthcare, the Advocate Healthcare, and so on and so forth. They have now bought pretty much most of the doctors' practices, so the doctors are employees of the system, and the patients will go into an emergency room with something that they shouldn't go to an emergency room for. I mean, you got a bad cold, you don't need to go to Northwestern's emergency room. But if you go to Northwestern's emergency room with a really bad cold and you're coughing there, and after you've waited the 5 and 6 hours that you're made to wait in order to see a medical student, they order a bunch of tests on you, you get some blood drawn, you get a bunch of tests you don't need because you basically have a bad cold. And after you've gone through the CAT scan and the x-rays and the EKGs and they've made sure you haven't had a heart attack, and you leave with a bottle of cough syrup and told to see your doctor, and your bill is $7,000 for your bad cold. And everybody has stories like that, where you go in for a broken leg and the bill is $60,000. When I had my hip broken, I broke my hip. It wasn't a passive act. And after going in the hospital to repair my fractured hip, I decided to look over the medical bill, the line items of the medical bill. And the bill had come to repair my fractured hip and have a little physical therapy and some really disgusting food, was $125,000.
When was this? What year?
This was last year. This was 1 year ago, actually this month, I fell and broke my hip. And granted, they did a nice job. I'm not going to, but $125,000 is obviously an insane amount of money. A good friend of mine recently diagnosed, I never drink that, of a rare form of leukemia. And he went down, he saw the ads on TV, and he went to MD Anderson. And I'd never heard of this form of leukemia, so I looked it up, and it was really rare. And he was about the 100th reported case, and no one had lived longer than 1 year. Everybody had died within a year. But MD Anderson said, well, we're going to do everything we can to save you. And he had a horror show of a year with 2 bone marrow transplants that failed, and multiple chemotherapies, and died within 1 year, and $4 million of medical expenses. So the prices are just unbelievably high. Yet a place like Northwestern is listed as not-for-profit. But if you take a look at the real estate where Northwestern Hospital is, I would say it's the prime real estate of the city. It's right at the Gold Coast there. I don't know what that area is called, lakefront right in there. And that's all tax-free. They don't pay any property tax on that because it's not for profit. In the hospital, this not-for-profit hospital, which gives virtually no charitable care, 1% is charitable care, the CEO's salary, you'll never guess. If you threw a number out, you wouldn't guess. Does anybody take a number?
500 million.
500 million, you're wrong. $9 million a year in his salary. And this is very common. The CFO gets $4 million, CIO gets $1 million, but it's similar at Advocate and so on and so forth. In other words, there's simply too much money. There's so much money being spent in places like this that even Blue Cross broke its relationship earlier this year with Northwestern, said we can't afford you, because when a patient goes into these major medical centers, it's like going down a rabbit hole. You walk in with problem A, and they run a zillion tests on you, and then they send you to specialist B, specialist C, and suddenly you find yourself in the operating room when all you went in was for vaginitis. You think, what's going on here?
Time out, are they trying to protect themselves against
It's not
lawsuits?
just malpractice. Anyway, they got so much malpractice they don't know where they're going. But it's not just that. It's the amount of money that's spent on every test. A patient told me this last week. I thought this was a very funny story. She had banged her head. She really bumped her head, and she was feeling terrible from hitting her head. So she goes to the emergency room at Northwestern, and they run a lot of tests, MRI and so on and so forth, and they said, you have a concussion. Well, if you look up concussion, it's basically a bump to the head. Oh my God, she says, I have a concussion. And with a perfectly straight face, they say, we need to schedule an appointment with a concussionologist. And I said, a what? And I didn't know it was a specialty either, but I had to wait a week for an appointment. How were you? Well, I was feeling better, but I had to see my concussionologist, who did a whole bunch of other tests, et cetera, et cetera. Are you getting the gist here? I don't want to belabor this point. So the real villains these days, I think, are the hospital systems. Now, before I move on to the next real villain, which is Big Pharma, you need to know how hospitals charge you. Has anybody looked at a hospital bill? Has anybody ever seen one? When you of course are familiar with the almost a cliche, the $7 gauze pad or the $8 Tylenol, or every possible thing gets charged at these immense rates, and you say to yourself, where do these numbers come from? How can you get a $7 gauze pad? When I left the hospital with my fractured hip, I was given a walker. Now, all you have to do is go into a Salvation Army resale shop and you can buy a shitload of walkers for $5 a piece. But my walker was listed at $350, and I said, wow, what a terrific walker. There's a walker. So where do they get these numbers from? Well, there's something, a phrase you've never heard, called a charge master. Has anybody ever heard that?
No.
Okay. A charge master is actually a mega book, huge book, of the charges of every possible thing that they can have in a hospital that could appear on your bill. So, for example, when you start an IV, it's not only the IV fluid, the tubing, the Band-Aid, they charge for the skin marker that shows where. Every possible thing is charged. And the charges are immense. But if you go to a hospital and say, hey, can I see your charge master? I'm just curious, I want to look something up. Suddenly it's non-existent. Nobody knows where it might be. When they've had actually investigative reporters look for charge masters, they always get the runaround. It's not available, and so on and so forth. And so here's the charge master with these immense charges. Now, who pays, let's call the charge master rack rates. Let's call this pure retail. Who pays what on the charge master? The answer is the person with no insurance pays rack rates. Who pays $7 for the gauze pad? The person who has no insurance. All right? Each insurance company negotiates with a hospital the rate of a percent of charge master. So Blue Cross might get 75% off charge master. So on, Aetna gets another rate. As the healthcare systems get more powerful, they can start dictating to each other who pays what. Who pays the least, the very least? And the answer is, and this also is in foreign countries, the answer is the government pays the least. So the government, through Medicare or Medicaid, pays what a gauze pad should charge, should cost, okay? So a gauze pad should be 12 cents. And if you look at a Medicare bill on your charges, the gauze pad is indeed 12 cents. So 12 cents to $7. What the insurance companies would like is they would pay a percentage more of what Medicare pays. We'll pay 20% more than Medicare. But what the hospitals insist is, no, you're going to pay us, say, 50% off of charge master, which makes the charges so high, and that's where all the money is going. So it's a very, very confusing system. But if there's any system that insists, that is an advocate for total socialized medicine, single payer, with the government controlling it all, it would be that the Medicare system and these charges just in stone from the government and nobody else having a right to do it. The other villain is a big pharma, which has gotten greedy beyond belief. It's storybook greed. I'm sure you've gone into a pharmacy and find a drug that you've used for years is suddenly much more money. Really become very, very expensive. And the reason is there's virtually no control over drug pricing. Nobody can come up and say, I refuse to pay that. What occurred, and was mentioned in the movie, the guy who was talking about how he would, maybe I will drink this, the guy who was talking about his mother and how he was going to do Medicare Part D for his mother, and doesn't everybody love there, etc. What he pushed through, as Billy Posen, I think his name is, pardon me?
Posen.
Yes. And what he pushed through was that it became illegal for the government to negotiate drug prices. So the pharmaceutical industry could declare, this is the price of our drug. And instead of saying, you gotta be kidding, that's a joke, isn't it? The government pays that amount. And that's why the prices are so high. So the current big business in healthcare is something called orphan drugs. Has anybody heard the phrase of orphan drugs?
Can I ask you, how did the VA avoid all these high costs? If you're a military veteran, honorably discharged, the VA, your
Right.
drugs are much
It's
cheaper.
called that's socialized medicine. That's total health care. That's what we should have, single payer. Excuse me. So, with an orphan drug, there's a bunch of hundreds of drugs out there that have kind of gone into disuse because they've been replaced by better drugs. Just one really quickly, there's a drug called colchicine, which actually, its root dates itself back to ancient Greece, the Isle of Cocos, and it's used for gout. And it works for if you've got gout. It's okay. Problem is that when you start taking it, you start having terrible diarrhea. It's not a great drug. And it's been replaced by better drugs. But what a group of investors do, this is nobody who does any research or development or anything like that. They simply buy the company that's making the drug, which is called colchicine. And colchicine, which I remember when I was a resident, a colchicine, you could get a bottle of 1,000 colchicine for about $19. It's a cheap drug. And people would get it, doctors would write it for gout. So now they have the full rights to colchicine. They put in an orphan drug application, and then they take all their investment money into advertising, and they flood doctors' offices with drug reps. You've seen drug reps. They're infinite. They totally look alike. They look as alike as sin to sin. And they come in and exhort how wonderful this drug is. So colchicine, which goes from a penny a pill, now you can get a bottle of 30 colchicine for $450. Same drug, same drug.
Wow.
There was a medication that I used a lot. When I was first in practice, you would have a tray of injectable meds, things like a penicillin or a B12, things that you'd use in the office. And one of the ones you used was called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Stimulates the adrenal gland to produce more cortisol. So you could use it for asthma. It was used for a flare-up of multiple sclerosis because it raised the cortisol level. So I just have this memory for prices. And I certainly remember that a vial of colchicine, which had multiple doses, it had 10 doses in it, was $9. And you kept it in the refrigerator because it spoiled. And that was fine, it was $9. Over the years it went up to $15, and then the company just kind of stopped making it because it wasn't very popular. And then a group of investors bought it for all the rights and came up with a few diseases that it would work for and started marketing it. Now, 1 teaspoonful, okay? A teaspoonful is 5 milliliters and a dose was 1 milliliter, so it's 5 doses. 1 teaspoonful is $23,500 a vial.
Oh my God.
Okay. Now, how do you get this drug cheaper? Well, the best way is to buy stuff from Canada. And we have a fax machine that just sends prescriptions to Canada for people all the time. For example, here in the United States, Viagra is now up to $60 a tablet. And although you can get a coupon that'll knock 10% off. So that means 10 Viagra is $600, okay? And if you take that prescription and fax it to a drugstore in Canada, you get the exact same Viagra, no different, for $3.10 a pill. The famous one, a guy named Martin Shkreli, does that name ring a bell to you? He was the one who was the smartass who owned the company of anti-parasitical drugs, and his the price was amazing. It went from $1.80 a tablet to $175 a tablet. And what does the Wall Street Journal talk about? How it was a great turnaround, it was a great boon for the investors. Didn't talk about the moral crap behind it. It was just a great boon for investors. So currently, the real problems are the huge medical systems, which are just sucking in the money.
Oligopolies?
Pardon me?
Oligopoly? Like
Yeah.
not monopoly, oligopoly?
Yes, yes. And the big pharma, and the last group, frankly, are the medical profession themselves. There are far too many procedures, surgical procedures going on. Surgical procedures where there's really no indication to have a surgery. They have shown, for example, that arthroscopies, you know what an arthroscopy is, I don't go into details, but they did a study on sham arthroscopies. People agreed to wake up from surgery with a scar, but they weren't told whether they just had a scar put there or they actually had an arthroscopy. And then people agreed. It was an interesting study. And at the end of 6 months, those who had the sham arthroscopy had the exact same success as those who had a real arthroscopy. So every arthroscopy that's done is basically a ripoff on the system. I had talked to a friend of mine who's an orthopedist, and I'd said, there seems to be an awfully lot of back surgery being done lately. My center down the street, we have 2 chiropractors, and we really send very, very few people to surgeons over the course of a year. But so many people will go into a place like Illinois Bone and Joint and so on and come out with back surgery. Now this was not a back surgeon, and difficult sense of humor. And he said, well, David, there's 2 indications for back surgery. Yes, I agree that a lot of it is being done. There's 2 indications for back surgery. First, does the person have good insurance? Okay? And secondly, does the patient have a back? Okay? And it's hard to go to a podiatrist's office without leaving with a $400 orthotic. It's hard to go to these different doctors without a procedure being done. A book came out, and I'll end on this, of one person going to different healthcare systems with the same problem and trying to find out what was going on. And so he had a really bad shoulder. And when he went to China, of course, he was offered massage and acupuncture and some herbs, and from my point of view, a very sensible prescription for Motrin. But every single country had pretty conservative therapy. When he went to his orthopedist in Colorado, he said, we need to schedule you tomorrow morning to have a shoulder replacement. And that defined a lot of what was wrong with the healthcare system. So things have not improved. Things are very, very difficult now. If the president succeeds in overturning the Affordable Care Act, every major medical group has said, don't do it, tweak it. There's certainly ways to tweak it, but don't eliminate it. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And I tell my patients, just stay healthy. Just try to avoid the system as much as possible. He ends with, walk and eat vegetables. Great advice. Just stay away from us. Let me take some questions now.
Can I ask you this though? You know, as a physician yourself, it takes many years of long, hard study to become a doctor or even an attorney. So you should be compensated financially for that, because what's the incentive of having all that grind of schooling and forfeiting other pleasurable things? So some people would say, well, you know, what's the use of having people want to be doctors and if they don't get paid well?
Well, I don't know if I fully agree with that. I don't know if really well. You really actually spend a lot of time writing a PhD thesis and, you know, getting a degree and teaching college. So I don't know if these should be rewarded that much as a multiple. Anyway, the field to go into these days is to get an MBA in health management and become a CEO of a hospital. I think that it's appropriate to be paid. I don't think that it should be a huge amount. I think that the doctor in France, who said that he was getting paid by the government and had a very comfortable life, and the salary that he gave, by the way, which is I think $200,000 a year, 10 years ago, he was being paid better by the government than 10 years ago a family practitioner was earning in the United States.
Oh.
Family practitioners probably make these days an average of about $130,000 a year. The big money earners are the ones who do a lot of procedures, the orthopedists, the cardiologists who do the stent insertions, neurosurgeons.
Anesthesiologists.
They make a lot of money. But he was making a perfectly good living. I don't think any primary care doctor in the United States would say, oh, the poor guy is really suffering. I think they'd be really envious of his life, and his paycheck was coming from the government. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I just have two comments. One is that there is a difference between national health and socialized health. Socialized medicine is like the VA, where the government owns the hospital and pays the doctors, and the national health is where the government is the insurance agent.
Right.
And the other point I wanted to make is that I worked for a hospital, and I've been retired, but when this movie came out, I talked with someone in human relations, and apparently they had a special showing of this movie for the human relations departments in the hospitals, because one of the things that really kicks you in the gut is when that nurse says this hospital that is the health insurance agent would not pay for life-saving surgery for my husband. That's something that really affected a lot of nurses.
As it should, but I don't know how much it changed actually the entire system. That's a very moving moment when she says how the hospital board denied the treatment for her husband and her husband died. That's really painful. And the other one that was incredibly painful for me is the woman who was saying how many people, the doctor in Congress was saying how many people she probably killed by denying benefits. And that's something that we get endlessly. Drugs are denied by people. I'll typically write a prescription for a drug, and it'll be, we call it bounce back, it'll be bounced back from the pharmacist. They want a letter. We have to write a letter to get the drug. It's just, money is too much involved in this system, and there's too much profit.
And look at the great care they got at Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, well, that's Michael Moore's. Yes, ma'am.
Are you seeing, with healthcare and people coming in for needing care, are you seeing more concern with people coming in with health conditions that are aggravated by anxiety and depression?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, a lot of anxiety came after Election Day, and we really were seeing people calling, and I work by email with a lot of patients with anxiety and panic attacks, people saying, oh my God, the EPA is going away, animals are going to go extinct, and so on and so forth. There's a great deal of anxiety now.
So is there more connection between doctors and mental, like how are you as doctors dealing with that kind of influx of activation?
Well, my center over on Clybourne Avenue does what's called integrative medicine, combining conventional and alternative medicine. And so many conditions that we see, from migraine headaches, irritable bowel, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and the like, are really various manifestations of stress. And so rather than give you a pain medicine or a headache medicine, we try to get to the root cause of the stress through counseling, stress reduction. We have yoga classes and acupuncture and Reiki and things like that, and try to find out where the stress is coming from. Yes?
With so much of government costs in Medicare today, Medicare, Medicaid, VA, all that, why isn't there more emphasis on preventative medicine controlling hypertension and diabetes?
There actually is probably more than meets the eye,
Okay.
because when you have a lot of Medicare patients, you've heard of electronic medical record systems, and the electronic medical record systems have to have a lot of data on, have you asked about dieting, have you reduced salt, and you have to check yes or no. And then when Medicare does an audit on that chart, if you have not answered those in a way that they like, they can reduce your reimbursement. So actually there is that going on. It's not there.
Right, okay.
Yes?
Me?
Wait a second. I broke my arm in December, and I don't know what you're talking about. You say that you had to pay so much. I didn't pay anything. And my brother's been sick for 5 years, and he very seldom gets a bill.
Oh, I did not get a bill.
Can I say three things? And as far as the pharma, I pay for a Provocol for 90 tablets, $2. And when you're talking about Europe, socialism all across Europe, that must have been, how old is the movie, 10 years?
10 years ago.
They're all going broke. Greece, Spain, all these countries are going broke with their socialism. And even the United States, with Obamacare, Medicaid is going to cost $1 trillion by 2019. $1 trillion. And that's why
Actually, that doesn't sound unreasonable to me, because if we're spending $4 trillion a year now on health care, and Medicaid will go to a certain income and below, that's 25%. It sounds like a lot of money, but really, when you think about it, there's a lot of people in this country who need health care.
But poor people could always get health care by law. They go to the emergency room. If the emergency room doesn't take them, they can sue and they got, the poor people have lawyers. They got these lawyers.
You know, all I can tell you is you've got to be in the system to know that you're not correct about a lot of information. First of all, your $2 Provocol. I'm glad you paid $2 for Provocol, all right?
Yeah.
However, during the entire time that the drug was on patent, okay, and they were able to charge the full amount, a month of Provocol cost about $200.
No, it was $33, $1 a pill.
It wasn't. That's what you paid.
2002.
That's what you paid for it, okay? However, you were paying an insurance premium that paid the rest. People get these copay cards, okay? Use this copay card and you have no copay on this drug. Go pick it up from your pharmacy. And you honestly can't believe that the drug is being given away to you for zero. The pharmacy takes the copay card and then bills your insurance company $400 for it and gets paid $400, and you walk out of the drugstore saying, this drug didn't cost me anything. Come on, somebody paid for it. It's not free. Believe me, these drugs cost a fortune. And as for you not paying for your broken arm, that's great. You had Medicare. You had Medicare with a supplement. So an entity, your insurance company and Medicare paid for it. My hip break and etc. was 125 large. I didn't pay 125 for it. Medicare plus Blue Cross paid for it. The fact that though it should be anywhere near 125,000 is the obscenity of the system.
But Obamacare was designed to fail. Even Schumer was saying, because they want to go on single payer.
You're talking to somebody who actually thinks that everybody in this country should have access to health care. It should not just be the wealthy should have it, or the people over 65. It ought to have been, and I think that Obama's major error, but he had to make so many capitulations in order to get the thing passed, is they used the phrase public option, which was very confusing to people, because then the Congress, who were against Obamacare, kept saying public option was the same as socialized medicine. Totally wrong. What they did in Canada, when they were trying to get theirs gone through, they called it Medicare for everybody. People understand Medicare. And if Obama had kept saying, Look, all I'm trying to do is, you know that great Medicare that your father or grandfather has, where he's got the Medicare card and he's got a supplement policy, and like you, he pays nothing for his broken arm or $2 for his Pravachol? Isn't that great? Doesn't your grandfather like it? And people would say, yes, that's what I want for America. That's the kind of health care that I want. I've got some questions in the back, sorry. Yes, you have to talk loud. I'm actually deaf.
That's fine. I see that, Advocate is trying to merge with North Shore Hospital, and the Federal Trade Commission is suing to block
Well,
that.
that's the trend, sure.
Yeah, and I'm having trouble finding good coverage of that. I just wondered if you had any comment about it.
Well, there'll be one CEO that emerges with an $11 million salary. I don't see any cost cutting anywhere. They just keep wanting to create larger and larger companies. I don't think anybody will actually benefit from it except the principals in the system themselves.
Yeah, their argument is it will enable them to form a new ACO.
Right, except that it's been shown that healthcare costs are not reduced. In other cities where this has occurred, we're actually late. In other cities where this has occurred, there hasn't been a drop in healthcare costs at all. And in fact, what occurs is a phrase that's very big in healthcare called overutilization, which is what it sounds. Too much of it. There's just too much. So you go in for a cold and you get measurement of your blood oxygen and a CAT scan of your lungs, when it really just should have been some Kleenex, okay? And that's what these big systems and these mega mergers are creating, is overutilization. Yes?
I have the view that humans are over-utilizing the earth. We are too many, and we are really uncaring about our neighbors, whether they are animals or creatures of different kinds. We are polluting the earth with radioactive waste. We are polluting with CO2 and making it warmer. So I think we should take a view, a more encompassing view of how humans are affecting every other living thing in the earth. I think life is a marvelous thing, no matter where it is, in a mosquito or in a creature, and we should appreciate that to the extent that life is so unique in this earth, and probably is not so unique in the universe, but we cannot see.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, but I would like the schools, the teachers, the doctors, all to put more emphasis in this overall view of what we're doing to this planet.
I think that if we had that attitude on a global basis, that we wouldn't be in the mess here in the United States that we're in right now. I think that's a really important point to make. Yes?
David, why are the drugs cheaper in Canada? Is it because of price control up there, or?
Oh, yes. What they do in Canada is, and they do the same thing in France, is that the government negotiates with every big pharma company. Big pharma company comes out and says, I've got X, Y, and Z drug, and this will cost you X number of dollars a pill. And the government says, you gotta be kidding. Okay, we know what this shit costs. And we're gonna give you 10 cents a pill, and if you don't like it, you know, go somewhere else. Go to America and sell it for you $2 a pill. So this is why the Viagra is $3.10 in Canada, because the government told them to think of flying, etc. And we didn't. Our government, it's illegal to negotiate.
Why?
Why? Why? Because when I last added it up, the entire healthcare system, I looked this up last night, I should have written it down to impress you more if I read it, but if you add the healthcare systems like hospitals and so on and so forth, plus big pharma, plus the medical association, everybody involved in healthcare, the amount of money they spend on lobbying Congress is $9 billion.
Big deal.
Okay? Now that's a shitload of money. And you
Yeah.
can buy a lot of stuff. And you can buy congressmen who push through a law that says the government will not negotiate health care prices, which we've got in place right now. One more on your cheerful, try to give a cheerful answer. Go on.
Well, I'm just curious what you know. What I've heard from people who are in big pharma is that the prices are high because it costs so much to develop these drugs.
That is bullshit. If you're buying an orphan drug that's been around for 50 years,
Yeah.
okay, it doesn't cost a dime to develop it. Most of the drugs are developed in universities or at the NIH or overseas. Lexapro, we've all heard of Lexapro, 11% of us take antidepressants. Lexapro was developed in a European country, and the company that marketed Lexapro simply paid a royalty. There was no developing. They paid the royalty to run it through the clinical trials, and it became a billion-dollar product. But the orphan drugs don't cost any money at all. They're just sitting there. They're found money.
Last question.
Yes.
Do you think that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for everyone would be far more effective than Obamacare?
Yes, of course, because I think Medicare is a great system. Have Medicare combined with a supplemental insurance policy, which doesn't cost very much money, that's a great system. And then it's also, the reimbursement under Medicare is controlled by the government. So the government doesn't pay the $1,000 a day for the room at Northwestern. The government would tell them, get out of here. The government pays, say, $250 a day. Hospitals are deathly afraid of the entire system becoming Medicare because the profits drop. But that's the only thing that can save the system, is to stop having a system where so much money is involved.
Outstanding.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.